All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing in Star Wars 5th edition. I actually ran a poll. If you guys don't check out the community tab on this channel, you should, because I do run polls every so often. And for this one, I asked what class you guys wanted to see after the monk, or really what kind of class. And it seemed that you guys were really interested in Force users. So, based on that, I decided probably the easiest way for us to look into and start learning about Force users and Force casting in general, because it is a little bit different than spellcasting in D&D, is to start with the Consular. The Consular is effectively just your Force caster. Like they don't have, you know, extra weapon abilities or anything. Their primary thing is they are a full caster. So I figured that'd be a nice place to start. Quick reminder: if you do enjoy this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super important. Not only to let me know what you like it, but so that other people actually see this. If you don't do that, then no one else sees this. And half the people that are subscribed to me don't see it, to be perfectly honest. So come on, do it. That being said, let's dive into force casting. So before we go to the Consular itself, we're going to look at force and tech casting. This is basically what replaces spell casting from D&D 5th edition. And the kind of primary aspects of it are relatively the same thing. You have a bunch of spells. You cast them. You can either cast them as an action, a bonus action, or a reaction. Some of them take a little bit longer than that, and they'll actually have a casting time. So those are all kind of similar. Bonus actions, spell casting still has a similar effect that it does in D&D 5th edition, basically meaning if you cast a spell as a bonus action, you cannot use your... if you cast a leveled spell as a bonus action, you cannot use your action to cast a leveled spell for the rest of that turn. So that does change slightly based on the wording here, how things like that work compared to D&D 5th edition and Star Wars 5th edition. The big thing being, so in D&D 5th edition, this is the actual wording. A spell cast with a bonus action is especially swift. You must use a bonus action on your turn to cast a spell, provided that you haven't already taken a bonus action this turn. You can't cast another spell during the same turn, except for a cantrip with a casting time of 1 action. So that's what it says for D&D 5th edition, and that actually is a really limiting aspect, and something that a lot of people don't realize that covers. Basically, that specific rule was written for sorcerers. Sorcerers have the ability to bonus action cast almost any spell, and without that, they would be so massively overpowered that there would be no reason to ever play anything that wasn't a sorcerer as a spellcaster. That being said, it also means, like, something that happens quite often. You bonus action cast a spell, and this is only for leveled spell. If you have a cantrip that works as a bonus action, that doesn't limit you. You bonus action cast a spell. The enemy counterspells it, which is a 3rd level spell. So the player goes, why counterspell the counterspell? You can't actually do that, because it is still the same turn where you use your bonus action to cast a spell. A lot of people don't realize this. Some people think that reactions are somehow outside of turn order. They're not. They happen... reactions are basically spells that can... or abilities that can happen on other people's turns. But they still happen on a turn. There is no outside of turn in D&D 5th edition. The same would be true here. However, the wording for bonus action force casting and tech casting is a little bit different, and it actually changes things then. A power cast with a bonus. This is Star Wars 5th edition. A power cast with a bonus action is especially swift. You can only cast one first level or higher power using your action or bonus action on each of your turns. Once you've done so, you can only cast at-will powers with your action or bonus action on this turn. So that is different. The one in D&D 5th edition is significantly more limiting. Specifically, you cannot use your reaction to cast a leveled spell. It's not possible if you use a bonus action to cast a spell. If you cast a force power or a tech power using a bonus action, a leveled force or to tech power using a bonus action, you still theoretically on your turn can use your reaction to cast a leveled spell. So that is a huge distinction between the two. Albeit one that most people aren't aware exists in D&D 5th edition, and that might be why they changed the wording in Star Wars 5th edition. I have not communicated with the people that write this, so I don't know what their thought process was. But if I were to guess, I would say it was probably like, well, they didn't like the fact that you couldn't use a reaction spell on the same turn that you cast a bonus action spell, because that does limit sorcerers specifically a little bit. So the rest of spellcasting is remarkably similar, except there we go. That's what it's called. All right. So sorry, I had to look up something because it was annoying the hell out of me. So the other big difference between force and tech casting versus spellcasting. Spellcasting uses what's called the Vancian magic system. If you're not sure what that is, you never heard that term, the Vancian magic system is basically you have leveled spell slots that you use to cast your spells. So you have 4 first level spots, 3 second level slots, things like that. That's the Vancian magic system. Effectively, I want to make sure that is... Yeah, there we go. And that's the spell system that, other than 4th edition, has been used all the way through D&D. And because D&D was the first RPG ever and the first kind of game that lets you cast spells and do things like that, that is the first magic system in any sort of RPG. Now, Force and tech casting don't use the Vancian magic system. They use force points and tech points, which is a modified version of the spell point system that's actually talked about in the DMG. For anyone unaware, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, Chapter 9 is called the Dungeon Master's Workshop, and it gives a bunch of variant rules that you can use to kind of change up your play. And under modifying a class, which is under the creating new character options kind of sub-chapter, one of the things that they talk about is using spell points instead of the Vancian magic system. And the big problem with going from spell points or going from Vancian magic to spell points is power limiting the use of really, really powerful spells becomes significantly more difficult. If you just changed from Vancian magic to a spell point system, or in this case a force point system, without anything else, spellcasters become massively overpowered almost instantly. And the reason why, in the Vancian magic system, you cannot use a lower level spell slot to cast a higher level spell. It's not possible. Sorcerers can somewhat get around that by changing lower level spell slots into spell points, multiple lower level spell slots into spell points, and then creating a higher level spell slot with that. But there's controls in the way that make it significantly more difficult on purpose. With a pure spell point system, theoretically, you could cast as many high-level magic spells as you have points for them, and effectively sacrifice low-level spell slots to cast high-level spell slots. What that translates to is things like a 9th level spell there is no class in D&D 5th edition that can cast more than one 9th level spell per day. It's not possible. Even wizards that get the ability to regain spell slots cannot regain a 9th level spell slot. The reason being, 9th level spells are massively powerful. They are one and done abilities on purpose. Basically, everything after about level 5, so 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells become very, very powerful. And because of that, you only ever get one spell slot of each one of those spells until you get to very high levels. At level 19, you can cast 2 6th level spells. And then at level 20, you can cast 2 7th level spells. And that's it. And you have to be massively, massively powerful to be able to do that. With a pure spellcasting, a spell point system, there's no limitation on that. And your ability to kind of control the already almost broken abilities of high-level spellcasters becomes non-existent. So, built into the spell point variant is basically any spell slot, any spell above level 5. So 6, 7, 8, 9. You can only cast one of those spells per day. The same rule is in effect here. We'll go into it in a little bit more detail when we actually get to the Consular, because it explains that in there in a little more detail. But that's how they kind of remove that thing. The other thing that they do, the actual spell point system is not directly the variant version that you find the Dungeon Masters workshop in the DMG. They change things a little bit. Because once you get to 3rd level spells, the power of the spells gets significantly more powerful. That's why when you hit 5th level, you get into what's called Tier 2 content. Tier 2 is between 5 and 10. And the reason why you go from Tier 1 to Tier 2 at level 5 is because that's when spellcasters get access to 3rd level spells. And they really change how things work. So the spell point system, to cast a 1st level spell using spell points, you would use 2 points to cast a level 1, 3 points to cast a level 2, but you'd use 5 points to cast a level 3. So once you get to 5th, it jumps up. The same is true when you get to 6th. 6th level spells, again, they're massively more powerful. A 6th level spell costs 9 spell points. 7th, 8th take 10, 11, and then 9th level take 13 spell points. So they built into that system that, yes, these spells are so powerful that there is a jump every time you hit a new level of magic. And those new levels are 3rd level, changes everything. 6th level, changes everything. So that's when you see the jumps. And the 9th level definitely changes things. Here, that limitation isn't in effect. Spell points or force points to cast a 1st level force power is 2, 2nd level is 3, 3rd level is 4, 4th level is 5. So as you can see, it's always just one more than the level. So, and I've mentioned this before, Star Wars 5th edition KK characters are just going to be more powerful than D&D 5th edition characters. That's why this is a conversion, not an expansion. You cannot use Star Wars 5th edition characters intermixed with D&D 5th edition characters, because the D&D 5th edition characters are just going to feel a little bit less powerful. They're not going to be able to do as much. And this is one of the examples why that happens. We'll go into a little bit more when we talk about the Consular itself, because there's other things that just make them more powerful. But this is a really good example that using the same system, you run into kind of less issues, or you can cast more force and tech powers than you would be able to cast spells in D&D 5th edition using a spell point system. Yeah, like I said, it's interesting. The other kind of big change, specifically when we're talking about force casting, is classes don't have spell lists. That's another way that you can actually limit the power of a class, is change its spell list. If there are certain spells that interacting with abilities would just create something that's not good, you just don't put that spell on their spell list. There are no spell lists in Star Wars 5th edition. You just have 3 different versions of force powers. You have light side powers, you have dark side powers, and then you have what are called universal powers. And there's no limitation as to which spells you can learn. We'll talk about learning as far as the console is concerned when we talk about them. But the big difference between light side force powers, dark side force powers, and universal powers is what ability score you use to cast them. Light side force powers use wisdom. Dark side force powers use charisma. And that actually is kind of... That actually aligns with the lore of how the Force works pretty well. One of the things, one of my favorite things in the world, I'm trying to see if I can find it. The actual Jedi Code. There we go. So there are actually 2 things. There's the Jedi Code, and then there's the Sith Code. In the expanded works of in the expanded universe of Star Wars, and they do pretty well kind of explain how they access their connection to the Force. The Jedi Code is a mantra that I can't remember if it's actually showed up in one of the movies, but it shows up in video games constantly. It showed up in a lot of the books. This is the Jedi Code as most people know it. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no death, there is the Force. That is the mantra of the Jedi Order. Which is effectively the main group that deals with the quote-unquote light side of the Force. So it actually explains how they use the Force pretty well. There is no emotion, there is peace. There's no ignorance, there is knowledge. There's no passion, there's serenity. There's no death, there is the Force. The first and the third lines are probably the most influential when you think about how a Jedi accesses the Force. And that is effectively their ability to control the Force is based on their ability to control themselves. Jedi in general put a large emphasis on self-control, controlling your emotional state, controlling how you react to things. The more in control of yourself you are, the more in control you can be of your environment and the Force itself. So, Jedis are able to access the Force through willpower. They sit there and they will themselves, and they're able to detach themselves from their emotions, and that's how they control the Force. When a Jedi becomes too emotional, they lose their connection to the Force. There was actually a plot point in the Revenge of the Sith that isn't really expanded upon in the movie much beyond a couple of lines, where Mace Windu mentions, perhaps we should tell the Chancellor that we can no longer use the Force, or something similar to that. I don't think it's no longer, but we're having difficulties with the Force. Well, in novelizations and in the expanded universe, they actually explain how that is. Basically, what happened is Emperor Palpatine, back when he was Chancellor Palpatine, and even when he was just Senator Palpatine, he created a situation where people were scared constantly. The Clone Wars created a situation where people were always worried about what was happening, and Jedi can feel the emotions of people around them. So when you have an entire planet, an entire galaxy that is afraid, that starts to bleed into the Jedi themselves, and it started to dull their ability to sense the Force and use the Force, because they were themselves starting to get emotional just from effectively a contact high from everyone else in the galaxy being afraid. And that was done on purpose. Palpatine was this brilliant strategist, and so he did that on purpose to weaken the Jedi. That's how they didn't know about Order 66 until it was too late. That's how all of the clone troopers were able to assassinate all these Jedi except for Yoda, because of his incredible control. In the middle of the execution of Order 66, you watched as Yoda felt all these Jedi being killed all across the galaxy simultaneously. You see it in the movie, and he's but he had such control that as soon as he sensed the dangerous motivations behind him, he does a little flip, cuts off both their heads, and he's good. So when you're looking at light side force powers, them being controlled by wisdom in D&D and in Star Wars 5th edition does kind of coincide with the idea of willpower. Will saves from previous editions all effectively turned into wisdom saves in D&D. And the things that you generally take wisdom saves are things like spells that control your mind and things like that are generally wisdom saves. On the other side, if we look at the Sith code, this is the Sith code. And again, this never shows up in any of the movies, but it shows up in video games constantly. And it really gives a good idea of where Sith and dark aligned Force users get their ability to control the Force. So the Sith code, peace is a lie, there's only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Here, they view the idea of being able to control the Force and to be able to use their abilities is entirely based on passion. Passion is the first thing that they get. The more passion they have, the more strength they have. The more strength they have, the more power they have. The more power they have, the more they gain victory. And every time they get more victory, the things that are limiting them, the chains that limit them, are broken. So the Force goes, for dark side Force users, always is passion. Now when we look at charisma is effectively your ability to influence people. Tying it directly to the idea of passion is a little bit difficult to do, but it's easier to tie passion to charisma than it is to tie charisma to passion, because charisma is a lot of different things. Your passion can be part of charisma, but there's other things that could be there too. But if you're passionate about something, and this is something that I learned in sales and in management, passion is motivating to other people. If people can see that you are passionate about something, you will motivate them to become passionate about it too. Even if they hate the thing, passion is contagious. It really, really is. So the idea of dark side force powers being linked to charisma, again, makes sense. And I think it's, again, from a mechanical standpoint, this is basically how they replace the idea of spell lists. By forcing you to kind of choose wisdom or charisma for your spell casting, you're also going to kind of be choosing which spells, which force powers you're going to be able to use, because having both of those be high enough that you can do things is going to be difficult, especially since you're generally going to need other ability scores. Things like dexterity is probably going to be somewhat useful for you. Constitution is probably going to be useful for you, because most of these casters have pretty low hit dice. So this does add that kind of mechanical balance of, okay, well, you're not going to be able to use the same ability score to cast both dark and light side powers. They're going to have different effects and things like that, and it does help you to kind of mold your character in a certain way. There's also feats and abilities that will interact specifically with light or dark side powers. So that's what effectively replaces spell lists is light and dark side, and then there are certain spells that have prerequisites. You have to learn, or not spells, force powers. You have a prerequisite where you have to learn, a lower spell, and then as you go higher, you can learn basically the improved version of that spell. So those are the limitations, and that's really the force and tech casting system. Tech casting is not quite as complicated as force casting because it doesn't use the light and dark side. I don't believe, before I say the wrong thing. Yeah, you have tech powers. So force powers specifically have light, dark, and a neutral. And the universal ones you can use either wisdom or charisma. So most spellcasters or most force casters in Star Wars 5th edition are going to use a combination of light and universal or dark and universal. You'll almost never, at least is from what I'm seeing here, you'll almost never see someone that takes both dark and light side powers because you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So yeah, that is the very, very long explanation of how force powers work. Again, I generally don't like going that much in depth into a system, but this is a very different system than how it works in D&D. So if you're coming from D&D to Star Wars, you're going to want to understand all of this before you start making your character. With that being said, let's dive into the Consular. So the name Consular. There's the game called Star Wars: The Old Republic, and in it, in the very early versions of it, you effectively had two different light side force users that each had a subclass that would kind of specialize them. They were the Jedi Knight and the Jedi Consular. The word Consular has shown up a ton in Star Wars RPGs. I believe the 3D6 or the D20 system Star Wars RPG from 3rd edition was used the Consular as a class. It's effectively, I'm trying to remember if there's a really good example of a an example of a consular. Yeah, technically, Satele Shan and her ancestor Bastila Shan. Bastila was a character in Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. Satele was a character in Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO. Those were consulars. I can't remember which consulars in any of the movies. But basically, you could say along the idea of like Qui-Gon Jinn could represent a consular style character, where they're going to be much more focused on the idea of knowing the Force itself and learning it. They don't use their lightsabers anywhere near as often as something like a Jedi Knight or Sentinel, where they spend most of their time learning swordplay. A good example, the difference between Yoda and Mace Windu. Yoda would definitely be a consular. Doesn't mean that he can't use a lightsaber. He's one of the most skilled duelists in the galaxy. But his focus is generally more on the Force and studying it and learning how to manipulate it as well as he can. Whereas Mace Windu was a battle master. Mace Windu was was considered the greatest swordsman in of his time. I don't know if Yoda was technically considered a better swordsman, but because Yoda was a miraculously good swordsman and also had unbelievable control over the Force. I think if they ever were to duel, I think Yoda would probably put him in his place. But if you're trying to come up with an idea of, well, what would I want to be as a consular? Think Qui-Gon Jinn, think Yoda. For these other ones that are a little bit more martial based, then you can start looking at Mace Windu. Obi-Wan Kenobi definitely moved more towards the Guardian or Sentinel style, where he was much more about lightsaber combat than he was about his Force control. So that being said, let's jump into the actual abilities of the consular. So, first things first. Class features. Hit points. Their hit die is a d6, which is going to be the smallest hit die. Again, this is effectively, if you're looking at this through the lens of D&D, your consular is going to be your wizard. Now, one of the unique things about the consular is the consular is the only full Forcecaster. So effectively, the consular is a combination, for the most part, the consular is a combination of wizard, sorcerer, maybe a little bit of warlock. Basically, all of your arcane casters are consular. And you could also argue that the cleric is basically your full casters are going to be the consulars. So, D6 makes sense. The wizard has a D6 for their hit die. Proficiencies, it has no proficiency in armor. Again, this is feeling very much like a wizard. Weapons, simple light weapons, and simple vibro weapons. So again, they're not going to be able to use the cool like double-bladed lightsabers or anything, but they can still use lightsabers. You know, they are Jedi. And that's what light weapons are. Saving throws are wisdom, charisma. Skills, choose 2 from deception, insight, intimidation, investigation, lore, medicine, and persuasion. Lore is effectively what replaces history. So again, all of this makes sense. The big difference is this is not going to be an intelligence-based caster. This is going to be either a wisdom or charisma-based caster. But they fill kind of similar roles as the kind of cleric and sorcerer in general, with a little bit of wizard slapped in there. So that's the class features. Moving on. Your first level ability is called Forcecasting. This is your standard casting. One of the kind of, I guess, interesting things about this, a wizard in D&D 5th edition, if you combine the number of cantrips they know plus the number of spells that they learn naturally, learns about 27 spells over the history of their character. Now, obviously, wizards can learn more than that, but 27 spells tends to be pretty standard for most full casters. You'll get somewhere between about 25 and 30 spells, generally closer to the 25 than you're going to be to the 30. The consular starts out with 9 force powers. And as they level up, they effectively get 2 or 3 more force powers every level until 20th level, where they only get 1 more. But at their top, they know a total of 40 force powers. Now, the interesting things about this is you learn 9 force powers when you choose this class right at the beginning. You don't learn, like with the wizard. The wizard knows 3 cantrips and I think 6. 3 cantrips and 6 spells. And I think I might have... Yeah, I totally got the number of spells they know wrong. Ignore the 27. I think it's probably close to the same, because they learned 2 more. So these are still going to have a little bit more, but it's not going to be quite the differential that I mentioned, basically. if we start with 9, and then yeah, that sounds alright. So anyway, they get a few more force powers. But the interesting thing about it is you learn 9 force powers. Unlike the wizard, where you learn 3 cantrips and 6 spells, or 6 level spells, you just learn 9 force powers of your choice. So if you only want to learn 1 cantrip, you can. If you want to learn 8 cantrips and only a single leveled spell, you can. Your limitation is what's called your max power level, which is basically the highest spells that you can learn and the highest spells that you can, not spells, force powers you can cast. So at first level, your max power level is first. Third level, you get second level force powers. Fifth level, you get third. Again, it follows the same progression as learning new spell slots in D&D 5th edition. So you can still go, 5th level is going to be your tier 2 for this because you're going to get your 3rd level force powers, and that's when things should start changing and they become significantly more powerful. So that is something that's kind of unique, and depending on how you want to build this, just like cantrips in D&D, your at-will force powers are going to get more powerful as you level up. So if you do want to focus a little bit more on just using cantrips all the time, which would turn this a little bit more towards the idea of a warlock. Warlocks are very cantrip-based. If you want to only have maybe 1 or 2 at-will force powers and everything else you do regular force powers, you can do that too. You have a lot of choice here. Now, as far as what is practical, you're probably going to want to do a similar amount to what you would get in a D&D class, where pick 3 or 4 at-will powers, and then 5 or 6 leveled powers. You do not have spell preparation or anything like that. In D&D, you either have memorized spells or prepared spells. Wizards prepare spells, where they have their spell book, and then they prepare a subset of those, and they can prepare a number of them per day. All faith-based casters have memorized spells, where they just pick the spells they want for that particular day. But they have a limited number of spells they can do. Here, this is actually very similar to how sorcerers work, where whatever spells they have learned, they always have access to them. Same thing as here. As force powers known, you always have access to them. You're not preparing a certain number of force powers per day or anything like that. You just have your force powers. Now, force points. Force points is kind of interesting. Again, I mentioned that it's easier to cast force powers than it would be to use the spell point system in D&D 5th edition, according to the DMG. The number of force points you get is not quite as much as you would get in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The Dungeon Master's Guide, by 20th level, you have about 133 spell points. In this, a max level consular only gets 80 force points. So a little bit less force points, but it's also easier to cast spells. So it's kind of a wash. There, it costs less spells. It costs less points to cast them, but you also get less. Effectively, you have a number of force points equal to your consular level times 4, plus your wisdom or charisma modifier. Which, that's another thing that's kind of weird about this. In D&D, you could prepare additional spells for a lot of classes based on your spellcasting modifier. This, it just gives you some extra spell points, which is nowhere near the same. At low levels, to give you an example, at first level, you're going to have 4 spell points, but if you're able to get an 18 as your wisdom modifier, which is not outside the realm of reason. You can't do it with point buy, but you can do it with if you roll at least a 16. So not particularly difficult to do that. That would effectively mean you double the number of force points you have at level 1. So that's a really, really big deal. However, the higher your level you get, you max out at a +5 until you get to level 20. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you max out at 5 additional points, which is effectively 1 additional 4th level force power. And that's it. Compared to being able to prepare additional spells from D&D, this just doesn't. Low levels, this will be really useful. Once you hit about level 10-ish, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make that big a difference as far as how much you're casting. So, then they talk about the max power level. And this is where they talk about, and this is one of the small issues I have wording-wise. They talk about your force powers can be cast at higher levels by just using, basically, if you wanted to cast a first level force power at 2nd level, you would just spend 3 force points instead of 2 force points. Very simple. But you can never cast a force power higher than your maximum power level. And then the second half of that little section talks about the really powerful ones. You may only cast force powers at 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level once. You regain the ability to do so after a long rest. My issue with this is it is ambiguous as to whether that means you can cast 1 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th level spell once per day, or you can cast 1 6th level, 1 7th level, 1 8th level, and 1 9th level spell. I know what they mean. You can cast each one of those once. Because again, I know what the variant in the DMG says, and that's what it says there. But in the DMG variant spell points, it specifically says you can use spell points to create 1 slot of each level of 6th or higher. It specifically says each level. This does not use the word each, and so it could very easily be argued that no, you can only cast 1 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th level. And the only thing that really kind of puts that into question is using the word and instead of or. So I would say rewrite this as you may cast force powers at 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level once each. Just putting that one additional word gets rid of any conversation whatsoever. And I 100% believe that's what it's supposed to be. And again, anyone that would be arguing that no, you can only cast 1 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th level spell per day, I think would be arguing in bad faith. But again, the words that you choose and the words that you use in an RPG are very, 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 very important, and rules lawyers will jump on that. So yeah, that's my only issue with this. And again, that does deal with the issue of super, the idea of spell points kind of breaking once you get to high level. So pretty easy. And then they talk about Forcecasting ability. You can use Wisdom for light side powers, Charisma for dark side powers, and Wisdom or Charisma for universal powers. And then Force Save DC, all that stuff, really simple. So that is Forcecasting for the Consular. Like I said, because of how this is built and the fact that you do not have spell list, you just have force powers. Theoretically, the Consular, the Guardian, which is effectively a Paladin, is basically what the Guardian is, and the Sentinel, which is its own beast, all have access to the exact same spell list. So you really can create some very weird characters when you start doing that. Like there's an ability that I believe is geared a little bit more towards the Guardian and the Sentinel. It's a force power that basically lets you teleport and make an attack, which is cool. But again, being a Guardian where you're only going to be a half caster, and I believe the Sentinel is also a half caster or something very similar to it. You're not going to be able to do that very often. If you wanted to build basically a melee Consular, you can. You have access to the same spells that the Guardian and the Sentinel have. There are melee-based spells in there. So if you want to create like a Bladesinger style thing, or a melee sorcerer, or a Hexblade Warlock style character in Star Wars, you can do that, and you don't need different classes for that. So I think that is both... I would call it both a strength and a weakness in the Force Powers system. Is it does allow for a lot of weird builds, but there is benefit in limitations, and it does mean it's significantly more difficult for you to encourage certain play styles, and it also means that balancing things in general becomes significantly more difficult, because you in D&D, you don't have to really worry about wizards getting access to certain warlock spells, because only warlocks get access to them. And so warlocks have these weird, crazy spells because they get so few spell slots per day that they get these weird spells that do weird things. If wizards get access to them, that starts making things a little bit different. That's one of the reasons why the lore bard is so powerful, because they can take spells that they're not supposed to have access to and use them in really, really weird ways. This effectively turns any spellcaster or any forcecaster into a lore bard kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, because I have not looked over every single force power, I cannot tell you how difficult it is to kind of balance things like that. I will tell you, I don't really enjoy building spellcasters in D&D because it takes a lot more time than it does building a martial based character, because you have to pick your spells. This takes even more time because you no longer have a limited spell list. You have access to literally every single spell, and the book itself does something that it annoys me, because it does the exact same thing in D&D 5th edition, where they list all the spells in alphabetical order. I think it would be significantly easier if they would list them by level and then alphabetical order underneath each level, because it would just make it that much easier to find spells, because you'll have first level spells next to cantrips next to ninth level spells, just based on what the first letter of the spell is, and it makes it really, really annoying to figure out what spells you want to take. And this is expounded unbelievably far with this with Forcecasting, just because now you don't have even a spell list that kind of limits it a little bit for you. You have every single spell is just force power is there, and it becomes very, very confusing very quickly. That's one of the benefits of spell lists, is it does allow you to direct and make things a little bit easier for new players. I would go as far as to say I would not, if someone was brand new to RPGs and they wanted to play Star Wars 5th edition as their first RPG, I would not allow them to play a consular. It is just too open-ended for someone that doesn't understand any of the systems yet. So, yeah. Moving on. Your other first level ability is called Force Recovery. Force Recovery is effectively supposed to be Arcane Recovery from D&D 5th edition. The difference is Force Recovery. When you finish a short rest, you can regain a number of force points equal to half your consular level plus your wisdom or charisma modifier, your choice, minimum 1. Once you use this feature, you must complete a long rest before you can use it again. Compare that to Arcane Recovery. Arcane Recovery, once per day when you finish a short rest, so same thing, it's a one and done after a short rest. You can choose expended spell slots to recover. Spell slots can have a combined level that is equal to or less than half your wizard level, and none of the slots can be 6th level or higher. Regaining spell slots versus spell points. Again, for a consular, you get 4 spell points per level. But they don't mention everything is generally rounded down. But like at first level, that means you can regain. Well, I guess because your wisdom and charisma modifier are going to be a much bigger thing. This effectively means that at first level, you can get all of your force or most of your force power back, because even if you only have a 16, which is extremely common, that is a normal starting number for your spellcasting ability score. Half your consular level, half of 1 is going to be 1. If they go with the you always round down, half of 1 would technically be 0.5, which would round down to 0. You would get 3. They don't say rounded down here, so theoretically you might be able to argue 3 or 4, but you start with 7, and this would effectively give you half of them back. So at low levels, force recovery is significantly more powerful than when you get to high levels and your wisdom or charisma modifier just isn't giving you as much. Well, then you're not getting anywhere near as much compared to, a 20th level wizard could get 2 5th level spell slots back, which would effectively be 14 spell points. Whereas a 20th level consular, if they get 24, so technically it's 7. We'll talk about that in a little bit. 7 plus, they would get 17 off of a force point. So actually remarkably similar, even with the, I guess I'd never actually crunched the numbers out. This is impressive, to be perfectly honest. Because again, force points are just not the same as spell slots. I was thinking that it wasn't going to be this. This is the same thing. A 19th level has a significantly worse thing, but 20th level they get to add 4, like barbarians do. Yeah. Like I said, force recovery, it basically means wizard. This is the wizard class, and so they give them the wizard class because they're supposed to be casting a lot more spells. Makes sense. Moving on. At second level, you get force empowered casting. This is spell point, or this is sorcery points, and meta magic. That's what it is. Most of the force empowered casting things are meta magic options. So effectively, the consular is a combination wizard sorcerer, which I've mentioned before. If you just take pieces from different classes and shove them together, you're going to create an unbalanced class, because in 5th edition, classes are balanced around defining features. And if you take defining features from multiple classes and you shove them together, they're intrinsically not going to work together, because they were designed for an entirely different class. Because the consular is effectively all your full casters combined into one, or most of your full casters combined into one, it's not as big a deal, and your meta magic options effectively replace the eldritch invocations that literally every other class gets. Again, every class has this customizability thing that they get at second level. Force empowered casting is the customizability for the consular. So when you look at it that way, this is kind of a happy medium style thing, where they're giving you a little bit of customizability and the ability to, change how you cast spells, which is the major thing you're going to be doing with this class. And you have to basically give up other things that allow you to kind of modify the class. That being said, the other thing that's kind of unique about this is your force-empowered casting. Most of them use up additional force points. You don't have sorcery points like for sorcerers in D&D 5th edition. They have their spell slots and they have their sorcery points, and they're two different things. They can switch in between the two, but they are two different limited resources. So they have two limited resources they can pull from. This, everything is pulled from your one limited resource, your force points. And that actually harkens back to how meta magic used to work in 3rd edition. In 3rd edition, meta magic was done entirely through feats. It wasn't linked to the sorcerer at all. Any class could learn meta magic, and the way that it would work is if you wanted to cast a quicken spell or something like that. When you would take the feat, it would say you can cast this spell or you can prepare this spell 3 levels higher, and it allows you to cast it faster or allows you to, cast it, increase the range or something like that. That's how meta magic worked in 3rd edition. So it all used the Vancian magic system, and it just meant that, if you wanted to cast magic missile as a bonus action, well, you could cast magic missile, but you would have to use a 4th level spell slot to do it. So you would be casting the 1st level spell, the 1st level version of magic missile, but you'd be using a 4th level spell slot to do it. And so because of that, meta magic was not particularly useful in 3rd edition because it was just so limiting when you did it, that not a whole lot of people really used a ton of meta magic. I know there are going to be some people who go, no, meta magic was super. It wasn't. It really, really wasn't. The meta magic in 5th edition is significantly more useful and gets a hell of a lot more use than meta magic ever got used in the 3rd edition. So yeah, we'll go over. I will probably do. We'll see how much time this takes to get through the rest of this class because there's not a ton to this class, as spellcasting classes are prone to be. We'll see, because again, since they're mostly the same thing, I might do a separate video on it, or I might just go through them. We'll see. But yeah, so that's Force-empowered casting. Moving on. Also at 2nd level, you get Force Shield. When you're hit by an attack, you can use your reaction to shroud yourself in force energy. Until the start of your next turn, you have a bonus to AC equal to your Wisdom or Charisma modifier, your choice, minimum +1. This includes the triggering attack. You can use this feature twice. You gain an additional use at 5th, 9th, 13th, and 17th level. You regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Again, this whole thing could be improved with, you have, you can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. It's the exact same thing, and it's just less words. So I would highly recommend they change over to that because it works a lot better. But this is the shield spell, to be blunt. It is so in D&D, a lot of I guess maybe not a lot. Quite a few dungeon masters have problems with the shield spell because it is a 1st level spell and it increases your armor class by, I believe it's 5, which is a massive number, and it lasts until the start of your next turn. It is massively massive. It is the best bang for your buck 1st level spell you can get. Force Shield effectively is the shield spell, but it's modified so that it's not quite as game breaking. At 2nd level, you're probably only going to add 3 to your armor class, which is not a massive. It's not the 5. It's still pretty good, but it's not the 5 that you were getting. And that also means as you level up, you don't have to use your spell slots to do it. That was one of the limiting factors of the shield spell, is you had to actually use your spell slots. And I've seen dungeon masters argue that if there isn't a thing that says if you cast this as a higher level, you can't cast it using higher level spell slots. That's not how it's been ruled. Like, they've asked Crawford and Perkins about that, and they've said no, you can upcast any spell. It's just the ones that specifically have that get better at higher levels. But using that interpretation, they would only get 4 shields effectively per day. And that's a limiting feature that I've seen some DMs use just because of how broken it can be. This gets it away from you having to choose whether or not you want to use your 1st level spells. Because to be perfectly honest, a lot of, once you get to around level 5, and especially once you get to level 11 when you're in tier 3 content, the only thing spellcasters ever use their 1st level spell slots for, and a lot of times their 2nd level spell slots, is the shield spell. They don't use anything else like that. And that is boring. I've talked before about the idea that good game design, it gives you a choice. Bad game design gives you a right answer. Shield is kind of bad game design, to be blunt. because it is always more useful. When you get to higher levels, it is always more useful than literally any other first level spell, other than possibly Healing Word. There's no better use. This just takes it out of the equation. It's no longer a quote unquote spell, it's an ability built into the class. It also means you don't have to worry about things like Eldritch Knights getting access to it, or taking a feat that gives you access to first level spells and being able to use the shield spell. That's another problem with the shield spell, is you can take Magic Initiate. You only get to cast it once per day, but it's still a +5. And it doesn't require you to have a good casting modifier. There's nothing about it that uses your spellcasting ability modifier. So this takes all of that out of the equation. The only class that gets to use shield is the Consular. So no other casters are ever going to be able to use this. You have to be a second level at least Consular in order to use the shield spell. And I think that is an interesting and effective way to deal with some problems with the shield spell. And it also means, again, if you wanted to make your Bladesinger style, your Bladesinger style, or your sword mage style character, Force Shield is going to make it a lot easier for you to get close when you have bad armor class, because you don't have proficiency in armor. And force casting and tech casting is just like spell casting, where if you're not proficient in the armor you're wearing, you can't cast spells while you're wearing it. So yeah, overall, I mean, there's just a lot of there really isn't a bad time to use the shield spell. And now that you can use the shield spell and it's not going to take out your spell slots, you now actually get to use your first level spell. You actually get to use first level spells for something other than shield. So yeah, moving on. At third level, you get Force Affinity. This was the thing that kind of threw me, because at third level you get two different things. You get Force Affinity, and then you also get Consular Tradition. Consular Tradition is your subclass. There are 4 subclasses in the PHB. They are the Way of Balance, Way of Lightning, Way of the Sage, and Way of Suggestion. We'll cover those in their own videos. But Force Affinity is just another thing that you can use to kind of slightly modify it. And for me, it feels weird. It doesn't feel particularly useful. The 3 different affinities you can choose are the Ashla, the Bendu, or the Bogan. I have no idea where these names came from. I know Bogan is an Australian slang derogatory term. The other ones I don't recognize anywhere, so they may be from some expanded universe thing that I don't know, or they may have just made up words. I don't know. But Ashla, when you successfully cast a light side power, either your or the target's hit point maximum and current hit points increase by an amount equal to the power's level. This effect lasts for 1 minute. You can only have 1 instance of this effect active at a time. So effectively, you can kind of heal yourself when you cast a light side power. Healing abilities are all light side, but there's a bunch of different light side powers. To give an example, I think force, focus, heal, heroism, project, sanctuary. All of those would be first level light side powers. Telekinetic storm is another light side of a force power that is more aggressive. It's actually an attack. So yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the things you can go, well, I'm going to be a little bit more light side. I'm already wisdom based. This will help your light side powers be a little bit better. Bendu, you can add both your wisdom and charisma modifier to your maximum number of force points instead of just 1. Again, if you want to try and go both light and dark, Bendu allows you to kind of do that and gives you some benefits from doing it. Even if you are primarily just light or dark, that still might be useful somewhat for you. And then Bogan, when you roll a 1 or 2 on damage die for a dark side power, you can treat the result of the die as a 3. This one is actually significantly more powerful than either of the other 2s. Mostly because high level force powers are going to roll multiple dice. Any time you see an ability, it says whenever you roll a 1 or 2, you can replace it with a 3. That is statistical control. You are modifying the spread of numbers by removing the bottom numbers that you can roll. It effectively means all of your average roll is always going to be higher. It's going to shift up what your average roll is. Not an exactly 1-to-1. Like it's not doesn't mean that on a d6 your average roll is now going to be average roll in a d6 is a 4. If you can replace 1 and 2s with 3s, it doesn't mean that your average roll is a 6 now. It's actually closer to your average roll as a 5. But because any 1 or 2 is going to be a 3. So you can roll 3 times more often than anything else. Yeah. So this is statistical manipulation. But because high level spells just have you rolling a lot of smaller dice, like d6s and d8s, this is effectively the same thing you would get with like Great Weapon Master. But Great Weapon Master, you're generally only rolling 1 d10 or a d12, not 6 in a single roll. Bogan becomes massively useful anytime you're casting a power that rolls multiple dice, because instead of just modifying 1, you're modifying 6 or 8 or anything like that, which is a really common number for most spells. Like the Fireball spell in D&D is 8d6. Being able to not roll 1s and 2s on all 8 of those, that effectively means you have if you rolled all 1s, you have just increased the damage of that attack by 16 points. Because instead of only getting 8 damage, you would get 32 damage, because everything would be a 3. So yeah, Bogan, this is again why I'm less than thrilled with this Force Affinity thing. So again, there's so much kind of customizability and choice built into the class. Force Affinity really just almost feels like double dipping. It's like, well, you already can focus on light or dark side, and there's already things in here that will let you kind of build your class around that. This is just going, okay, well, now we're really going to give you something nice. And then again, when you look at Bogan, it is so powerful. You know, an additional, for a 9th level force power, an additional 9 hit points at level 17 is nothing. It's nice that your maximum goes up by 9, so you can regain those hit points anytime you're healed, but it's still nothing, and it only lasts for a minute. Every single time you roll dice, replacing 1s and 2s as 3s is massive for a spellcaster. It means that dark side force users are always going to be more powerful as long as Bogan exists. So that's my big issue with Force Affinity, is Bogan is the right answer. It is always the right answer. And that also means that the dark side is the right answer. It is always going to be more powerful than light side abilities, because it's just that much better. So yeah, not particularly fun. And I think the class works really well without Force Affinity. There's nothing else in the class that stacks on Force Affinity. It's just there. So yeah, moving on. And again, at 3rd level, you also pick your subclass. And it's something I don't understand. I think every single one of these, the same level that you pick your subclass, you also get an ability. And you don't need that. Your subclass is going to give you an ability. There's no need for the base class to give you an ability as well. You're just double dipping. And it also means you're going to run into trouble like with Force Affinity, where you're just kind of breaking the class. So 4th level, you get your ability score improvement. It's the same thing that it always is. Increase 1 ability score by 2 or 2 by 1, and or you can choose to get a feat instead. Moving on. That's it for the class until you get to 20th level, which again is basically how spellcasting full casters work. The cool new abilities you get is generally new spells. So you don't really need to add that much more to the class. The spells do that for you. So, yeah. Moving on. At 20th level, you get 1 with the Force. Your Wisdom or Charisma score increases by 4, and your maximum for this score also increases by 4. I think, I'm guessing this is a common theme in all of them, because the Monk had something like that, the Consular has it. I'm going to assume every single class gets effectively what is the Barbarian 20th level of ability in D&D 5th edition. They get to increase both their strength and constitution by 4. This, you only get 1 instead of 2, but it's the same basic principle, and it feels good, to be blunt. 20th level, it just feels good to be able to finally break above that 20. And it changes, again, without 1 with a Force recovery, nowhere near as useful. Those additional 2 points make a big difference. But that's not the only thing you get. Additionally, you gain mastery over a single Force power and can cast it with little effort. Choose 1 3rd level Force power that you know as your signature power. You can cast it once at 3rd level without expending Force points. When you do so, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest. If you want to cast it at higher level, you must expend Force points as normal. This is effectively, what is it called? Signature spells. The 20th level ability for the wizard is called Signature Spells. You choose 2 3rd level wizard spells as your spell book. You always have them prepared. They don't count against the number of spells you have prepared, and you can cast each of them once at 3rd level without expending a spell slot. So you can't do it again until finish short or long rest. So this is effectively a combination of the Barbarian. We give you additional ability score and half of signature spell. Which again, by the time you're 20th level, 3rd level spells are still useful. They're not the game changers that they were when you were 5th level. So yeah, overall, I've always liked the signature spell thing in Wizards because it feels really good to be able to go, oh, you know Fireball? Watch, I can do it without casting or using a spell slot. Poof. It always just felt really cool. And having the Consular have that ability, again, I don't know Force powers super well yet, so I don't know how broken this can become. It'll be based entirely on the Force powers that you choose, but if Force powers are balanced in the same way that spells are balanced in D&D 5th edition, this is a nice ability that's not going to be horrible. So, yeah. With this being over an hour, I will do the Force Empowered Casting as his own video. So, final thoughts. Overall, this is interesting. The fact that they basically put together, this is a wizard sorcerer with a little bit of cleric in there. Normally, I'm not a fan of that because I see that all the time when people make up their own class. They just take 2 classes and shove them together so they don't have to do multi-classing. And that's, first of all, it's lazy, and second of all, it doesn't work. You always create an unbalanced class when you do that. This, however, first things first, Star Wars 5th edition characters are a little bit more powerful than D&D 5th edition. And the things that they put in here make it a really interesting choice. I would really, I think I would really have a lot of fun playing a Consular. I think it's a really interesting class. The fact that you can learn every single at will Force power if you want. There's nothing that's going to stop you. You can learn no at will Force powers if you want. There's nothing that's going to stop you. Like, there's so many choices you have in here. Again, for someone like me, that the only characters I play, the rare instance that I actually get to play a character, I don't play normal characters. I play weird characters. I like doing that. The one character I'm actually playing in a campaign right now is a Battlemaster fighter. It's a human Battlemaster fighter that throws cards. Like, those are the weird characters that I like to play. This would allow for some really weird characters, and I like that. I'm a fan of Force Shield being changed, that the shield spell is not as broken as it is in D&D 5th edition. And I'm kind of okay with the Force Empowered casting basically replacing the other customizability options that would have been in this. Instead of getting a bunch of little Eldritch invocations, you get meta magic. And the fact that your meta magic options effectively use your force points, I think works well. I think it makes for an interesting class. The only thing I don't like about this class is Force Affinity. You can throw away that ability, and this is a really cool class. There's no reason for it to be there, and Bogan is broken. It makes Dark Force consulars massively powerful. Whereas Ashla is kind of interesting, and Bendu, if you really ignore all your other ability scores and only do Wisdom and Charisma, Bendu might be kind of useful, because that could be up to an additional 5 points, which is nice. That is a 4th level force power for you every day. And Force Recovery doesn't get to use both of those, unfortunately, but I mean that's still pretty useful. But Bogan just breaks everything because of how often there aren't spells, or there are very, very limited, generally first level spells like Magic Missile, where you only technically roll 1 die. Almost every single spell you are rolling multiple dice. Generally anywhere between about 4 and 8, some of them going up to 10 or 12. So Bogun becomes massively useful, especially when you're rolling a lot of small dice, like a lot of d6s. Bogun turns really, really powerful. Or if they have like a magic missile in this, that means your d4s, your magic missiles, they can only roll a 3 or a 4. That is a huge, huge thing. And again, I don't think it needs it. There's enough stuff in this class that you can customize that you don't need this Force Affinity thing to kind of direct the class. Part of me thinks this is meant to kind of replace spell lists and the kind of limitations that help point your character in a way. But it shows up at 3rd level, so by that point you should already know what you're doing. And again, Bogan is just so broken. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What do you think of, first of all, what do you think of Force Affinity? Do you think I'm blowing it out of proportion, or yeah, Bogan is broken? And what do you, are you a dark side or a light side user? Or would you be a utility our universal force power user? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.